Well, we can't thank you enough, Brock, Tom told him. Brock looked over to see the loud siblings all huddled together crying. What are the little kids doing here? He asked. Tom told him about the recent events, and his eyes wide. Well, we would have helped if you asked, he said. I wish we'd known that. We didn't want to put anyone at risk. Cooper suddenly reappeared, relieved to see that the Loud family was okay. He had seen Brock arrive and help and dealt with the horde of grown-ups. So is everyone? Brock asked. As far as I know, yeah, Tom said, studying the kids from his group. The Loud siblings, Grace, Maggie, and Shade. Where's Stan? Cooper asked. Tom's face dropped. He didn't make it, he said coldly. Cooper nodded. We found someone, a kid said, and all looked at them saw the kids, escorting the very tough-looking girl with the axe. It was Lexi. Where's Ethan? She asked. Who? Brock asked. She told him that she was the friend that distracted some greens so they can help rescue the kids trapped in the cars. I'm sure he'll show up, Tom told her. Lexi looked at the ground. Jake's dead, she said. I saw him get strangled by the fat one. Brock was about to ask her about who the fat one was when Ethan suddenly appeared. What the hell did I just miss with the group from that explosion? He asked. Lexi looked at him surprised to see him alive. You're alive! Of course I'm alive. Those adults are slow. Everyone caught up. Ethan told him that he was able to outrun the adults. They were most likely circling back, not only because more adults were beginning to appear, but drawn by the explosion. Lexi told him that Jake was dead. Ethan wanted to break down and cry, but he knew this was not the time. Brock ordered everyone to fall back, and his group began to lead them towards the middle school. Speck watched as the adults dug into the bodies they had been gathering. The stronger, the healthier ones got to look to eat most of the spoils. Some ripped off the flesh with their teeth, while the others tore in the flesh with their bare hands to get the guts that awaited for them in the inside. The tower was almost furious when it came to devouring a body. His sledgehammer rested against the wall. He stood and ripped off a huge chunk of flesh with his teeth. He swallowed it only a few bites. Speck wanted to look away, but he felt sick, and at the same time he was strangely fascinated by the feeding frenzy. They were like piranhas. One moment a body had the flesh would be next. It was nothing but bone. He prayed that the adults would soon leave. As soon as they were done, he was running low on food and water, and wouldn't have leave to scavenge until they were all gone. Then he heard a boom in the distance. It was loud enough to draw the attention from the other group of brutes. He looked up and saw a massive fireball coming from the same area as the high school. Soon a thick black cloud of smoke began to rise in the sky. Speck wondered what could have been. Could it have been the kids or the adults being careless, or was it just a coincidence? It's not like the adults were around anymore to control things to prevent stuff like this from happening. Speck suddenly remembered a show called Life After People, about what would have happened if every single person in the world were suddenly disappeared. He remembered about how people without it would look after things. Structures after objects would fall apart and crumble, like if a certain thing that someone would need it to keep their place bad from happening. It would show that it would happen if it were left unattended. Sometimes things would explode, like an oil refinery or a place where methane gas housed, or nuclear warheads. Speck then shook his head, and then emptied his dreadful thoughts. This explosion was nothing, probably just caused by a random spark. However, he didn't know why the explosion occurred near the high school. He soon looked back to the tower's group. He then noticed the explosion too. The flames he watched as the smoke danced and rise, but soon went back to their meals. Speck continued to wait until nightfall. The adults all eaten what they could, and weaker Fleeber-looking grown-ups fought over scraps. Eventually, the tower picked up the sledgehammer and roared into the night to get everyone's attention. He looked into the fireball that was still lighting up the sky and night sky as his group began to advance towards it, leaving behind a few weaker adults who weren't done eating. Finally, they're gone, Speck thought, as the horde began to reappear on some of the buildings. He waited for a few minutes to make sure they were really gone, and decided to finally get back to sleep. Good news, Dad. Finally left, Speck said as he joined back to his side. His heart skipped a beat when he saw his dad standing up and looking at him with the murderous intent. It had escaped from the ropes and had freed him down. But how? His question was quickly answered when his dad held up his hands to reveal that one was missing. Speck then risked taking his eyes off of them for a second, looked at the ropes in his hand that he was lying on. "Dad," was all Speck could say before he charged him. Speck screamed again, warning his dad to stop, but the monster kept coming forward. "No!" Speck reached down and pulled out a Glock, took an aim for the head, one deadly accurate shot. His dad went down instantly. Speck collapsed to his knees and wept. "Why, Dad, why?" he screamed. Already he knew the answer. This thing wasn't his dad. His dad was gone. All the adults were gone. It was just him. The speck of the earth. Just a speck of the earth that was just like on the galaxy. And how the galaxy was just a speck of the universe. They all rested in the teacher's lounge in the middle of school. And when they arrived, several kids came up to them and asked them what could have happened and what was the explosion about. But the elementary school group didn't feel like talking, so Brock had led them somewhere more private, a place where they could all gather their thoughts and were about to take a bite to drink. Tom had told Brock everything. The adults breaking into the school, the zealots, the execution, Lana leading them to their deaths, and the rescue mission. Brock couldn't believe what he was hearing. He had known those kids was going through so much hell, he would have offered as much help as he could. He went over to the Loud family, who were all sitting on the couch. "I'm so sorry for your loss," he told them. "Thanks," was all Luna said. "Can I get you anything?" "Some pillows and blankets. We were too knackered to walk back to the elementary school, if it's all right with you." "Of course, you all could take a rest. You're all heroes after all." Luna frowned. We're not just kids." A few minutes later, they were all comfy and cozy, and the twins were already asleep. Tom, Cooper, Maggie, Grace, Shade, Ethan, and Lexi were resting on the cushions as well. "Comfortable?" Brock asked. "Very," Luna answered. Everyone thanked him. "All right, rest easy and you enjoy your stay." He then looked back at the door before leaving the group to themselves. Shade was out like a light bulb. Cooper's mind was racing, but eventually drifted off. Tom kept replaying the horrors in his head. Bodies of kids lying everywhere, Stan being surrounded by adults, the Loud family making an attempt to save no one else but their sisters. He could have blamed them though. They were just kids after all. They weren't responsible for everyone, but at the same time he couldn't help but harbor some of the resentment. Oh well, he would have had to wait and say something about it later. Right now it was time for sleep. Maggie was so lonely. Her friends were likely not in the gym, but she couldn't face them. Not leaving them in the school for what she hoped would be a better life. She had lied there lonely, wishing that she had someone to hold on to. She missed her mom. Why did she have to act so cold and detached from her? She had known that she'd leave her so much sooner than she thought. She would have been more appreciative of her and been more affectionate. Life was cruel. She had no one now. The only person she remotely cared about was sleeping a few feet away. She wished she was sleeping next to her instead. She had a lone reclining chair with nothing but misery. Grace slept next to Ethan and Lexi. She had listened to Ethan cry, and Lexi tried to comfort him. She couldn't believe how lucky she was. She was the only person they were still alive? Luck? Was she lucky that she survived at the beginning of the apocalypse? And when she survived the adults breaking into the school in the basement, when all the kids had spared and was dragged into the school, instead of eating them on the spot? Grace knew that luck wouldn't last forever. But then again, they needed luck, and people who would risk a life and a limb for you. The Loud family was huddled together, arms wrapped lovingly around them. Other Creek waited for their siblings to fall asleep before she did, and when she noticed Lincoln was still alive, at the risk of waking her siblings up, she spoke. "Can't sleep, Link?" "Yeah," the white-haired boy said, "and that my head is killing me." And the statement that worried Luna. She knew that Lincoln would take a lot out of her head when the explosion finally sent them flying to the car. "Just trying to go to sleep. Hopefully by tomorrow, we'll be back at the elementary school, and then Sanjay can have a look at it." Lincoln nodded in his head, and he began to close his eyes. "Good night," Luna said, and they waited. Eventually she heard her only brother snoozing. Luna breathed easily. The last 24 hours. That had been quite an emotional roller coaster. Losing her younger siblings, getting them back, and almost losing them again. She closed her eyes and darkness grew and melted into a dream. She and the other siblings were floating, drifting away from the realm of safety, surrounded by nothing but love for each other. Brock stood up on the roof of the middle school, looking out in the distance. The fire at the school was still visible, and it was eventually joined by someone else, a girl. "Someday, huh?" she said. Brock looked back at her and smiled at the beautiful brown-haired girl whose name was Audrey. "Yes, it is. Indeed, nothing's comparable to what the elementary school kids went through. Tom told me about the school, how the adults been attacking it. They lost so many. I wish there was some way I could have spent with them in a week." Audrey put a hand on his shoulder. "It's not too late, you know." "I know, which is why tomorrow I'm going to have over a little chat with the kid in charge, Duke Malville." Audrey then shuddered him in a pretty much response of the kids. "Now I wish I had intervened sooner." "Exactly. He's not very stable if you ask me. They've killed kids, for crying out loud." "What?" Audrey's eyes widened. Brock had told her about the Zealots that just made her wide even more. "We're going to form an alliance. We need to work together to beat the adults. At the end of the day, they're the enemy. We should be fighting them, not each other." Audrey agreed. "Now let's rest up. We got a big day tomorrow, and things are going to change." Chris's army wasted no time on laying there on the waste around Hunting Oaks. They had stormed at the affluent neighborhoods where the spoiled rich kids lived in big fancy houses. The kids weren't prepared. No one could ever be prepared for Chris's army. There were just too many of them. There were surrounded mansions, swallowed them up like a blob. Once they had made it in, the kids were completely gone within a matter of seconds. Chris decided to stay behind and watch the action, with Cronny by his side. The kids' screams filled the nights, which had made Chris smile. He deserved this. He risked his life in the country, to suffer so tremendously as a result, and how he had to show for it was a small box of house. But now he was a king, a god amongst them. If these kids wanted to be saved, they would have to pray to him. At this point, it was quickly illustrated by a girl who looked to be about 9 years old, managed to escape from the horde. She saw them, and she was just different. She had no choice but to run up and beg, "Please, mister, please help me." Chris looked down at the girl and smiled. He wrapped his arms around to try and protect her, but then turned to Cronny, who was watching this with a creepy smile. "You know what my nickname is when I was in the army?" "No, Dog Man." The girl looked up at him confused, wondering who he was talking to. And then she looked up at Cronny and began to shake rapidly, more than she already was. "Mister, why are you—" Chris picked her up and bit her down on the nose. She screamed in pain as blood filled Chris's mouth. He had ripped her nose off completely and threw her down. She brought her hands up to her face and then felt around for her nose. She began to scream louder than she realized what Chris had done. Chris soon began to howl like a wolf. The other adults surrounding the girl had devoured her, while the others howled with Chris. Maybe it was soon over for Chris as he looked around, admiring the nice houses that now belonged to him. "Maybe I'll kick back and hang around for a while. It's not like the other kids in the house surrounding towns will be going anywhere." He took out the map from his pocket and studied it. He stopped his rampage in town next to Royal Woods. He looked in the direction of Royal Woods, and he swore he could see the orange glow in the distance. He dismissed it as being a small fire. He had seen the orange glows of it all in place now. It didn't bother him. He turned around back to his army and over 1,000 and told them to hang loose, gather up the bodies of the kids, and as he recruit them as soldiers as they needed. They were going to need to be work to get done. But for now, he needed to get some shut-eye, and he couldn't imagine anyone that worked harder than he ever had over the last week or so.